Carol felt her stomach tighten into a tight knot as she looked at her new neighbor's house. How could that happen? This should be a nice area where kids can safely play on the street while mothers make small talk over coffee. That had never happened before. She peered back at her neighbor's house. She didn't know what to think. She just felt the need to act. She had to do something before her neighbor came home. Carol Smith was proud of her neighborhood. After moving in here 10 years ago, she had seen many people come and go. She was a permanent resident and she loved the safe, suburban feel the neighborhood gave her. She wouldn't want to live anywhere else. Then something popped up out of nowhere in this perfect neighborhood that would change the feeling, and it would change Carol's life forever. It was around midnight when Carol shot awake as a van sped down the street. Usually there was no traffic on the street at this hour, let alone noise. She didn't like being woken up. She yawned and rubbed her eyes, looking out of her bedroom window at the street beyond. What she saw made her heart jump in her chest. When she looked through the window, she could see the field near her house. There was a small house in the field that stood there in the dark. There have been rumors about this house for many years. Between residents, they said it was either haunted or something terrible happened in it many years ago. What was certain was that the house had long been deserted, as long as anyone could remember. That was until one day. Carol was still staring out the window, her heart beating like she had just run a marathon. She could see through the window of the little house that there was movement. There was something in there, but what? Who would move to this creepy old place, especially in the middle of the night? Carol had a bad feeling and tried to get back to sleep. The next morning, Carol went to the old house to introduce herself to whoever was there. She even baked her famous muffins. She was determined to find out who lived in this house and why. As she approached the house, she saw features that she hadn't noticed before. This wasn't a normal house. It was something else entirely. Once she was 20 feet from the house, she couldn't help but laugh. The creepy-looking house in the dark was a little wretched house during the day. Who would ever want to live here? Maybe they had no choice, she thought. However, her laughter was interrupted when she realized that a man had been watching her from the little porch of the house. Their joy turned into fear. The new neighbor introduced himself as Derek. Carol had so many questions for the man that she had been thinking about all night. The man seemed unfazed by her questions, but still didn't tell her much of what she wanted to know. And when Carol spoke to him, he withdrew behind the front door. Was there something in him that he didn't want to find? He must have hidden something. After their brief conversation was over, Carol walked away from the little house. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. Although she didn't know what he was hiding, she was still convinced that there was something to be found in this house. Carol had to find a way to find out. She was more determined than ever to solve this puzzle. A few weeks had passed and Carol had spoken to all of her neighbors. They stood outside and chatted and laughed about the tiny house. It was a joke. The man couldn't mean it. Carol was still where she started with no information. Their new neighbor had been very secret since they spoke. But she was still just as determined as before to find out its secrets. She wouldn't stop at anything to find out. From all she could say, Derek didn't have a job, or if he did, he must have been working from home. He was never on his way to work and never seemed to leave his house after 5 p.m. Then Carol saw something on a dark night. Something she never thought she would ever see in her perfect neighborhood. Carol got up at 11:30 p.m. to let her cat out, and before going to bed, she peeked out her window. Her eyes were on Darren's house. Just as she was about to go back to bed, she heard a loud bang. She ran to the window, and to her surprise, Derek pulled up in his car to his house. But he wasn't alone. What was he doing at that time? Where had he been, and more importantly, why was he outside at the time? He got out of the car and went to the trunk. And when he got out of the trunk, left an uncomfortable feeling in Carol's stomach. It was a long and large bag. It looked like a garbage bag. She couldn't see exactly what it was, but something was in the pocket. It looked heavy, and Derek had to drag it across his lawn to his house. Carol's heart sinks. It couldn't be what she thought, could it? She got sick in the stomach. The next morning, Carol told her husband what she saw, but he just thought she was crazy. But Carol knew it wasn't her. What she saw would be anchored in her head forever. She had to do something, and she had to be quick. There was only one way to find out the truth. As Carol stood in her kitchen clutching a cup of tea, she wondered what to do. She couldn't go to the police because she needed more evidence, and there was no way her husband was going to help her. But when she took a sip from her cup, she saw Derek leave his house. With a nervous expression on his face, he jumped into his car and sped away. And that's where Carol knew what to do. She wasn't proud of it, but it was the only way to know the truth. When Carol saw Derek racing into the distance, she picked up her keys and left her house. She had no idea where Derek was going or how much longer he would be, so she knew she had to be quick. She raced out her front door and ran to his house before mingling in the bushes. She went to his back door, but Carol was running out of time. She had to be quick. Carol snuck into Derek's garden, and to her surprise, the garden was pretty pristine. Perfectly cut bushes and colorful flowers were scattered everywhere. She walked through the garden and made it the back window. She peered in, and what she saw left her speechless. Inside it must have been around 172 square meters. The entire space of the tiny house was divided into 4 sections on different levels of the floor. It looked like a washing machine was kept in the area under the floor of the kitchen, and there was a sleeping area on the upper level. How could Derek live like this? Carol thought to herself. Then suddenly her mind was shaken by the sound of her name. She turned around quickly and saw Derek staring at her. After an open discussion that lasted about an hour, Carol finally had the truth. It turned out that Derek had lived here while he waited for his new house to be completed. It's just on the other side of town. He made everything in this tiny house himself, inside out. Carol was amazed.